Good morning, guys. Um, Still waiting on a few people to hop in here. No, it's the first day post spring break, so I think it'll be a little rusty for everybody. But the basic plan for today is we are going to uh, quickly talk about the test from last week because I know that was a whole thing. And some of you, it's still a whole thing. So we'll address what's to be done about that, if anything. Then we're going to go over a little bit of your assignment, which will be due Sunday, assuming that we can turn in assignments, which we may not be able to. I don't know. We're kind of still just at the system's mercy at this point. And then we're going to get into personality. So personality is chapter 10. That is really the only chapters that we have to do that are left are chapter 10 and chapter 13, which are personality, which is the one we'll start today, and psychological disorders, which is probably my favorite. If you want to go into psychology as a career in the future, doing something like abnormal psych, which is the study specifically of like psychological disordered thinking, will definitely be a part of what you do. It's really cool. We're talking a lot about the different etiologies of different mental disorders. And then we also talk about treatments and medication, psychopharmacology a little bit. But that is chapter 13. Today we're starting personality, which is chapter 10. So we're going to talk about Freud a lot. You know, if you ever heard that name, he's one of the fathers of psychology. He's not my favorite father, but we'll talk about that more when we actually get to the meat and potatoes of what Freud was all about. But first, let's talk about the test. Okay. I know that a lot of you had issues taking the test. That's fine. That's the first thing I would tell you. It's just like, don't panic. We're going to get it figured out. If you still haven't taken it, like Blackboard has been weird. It's been doing things where it won't let people in at all. It's been kicking people out with like 10 minutes left to go. You know, like they'll get all the way almost to the end of the test and then we'll just yeet them out of the entire system. I don't know why it's doing that, but we keep getting emails in our Greenville Tech accounts that are like, hey, Blackboard's still not working. We're like, we know. So I know a lot of you have emailed me. I'll try to get back to as many of you as I can, but it's largely the same problem with pretty much everybody. And there's not that much I can do about it, unfortunately. The only thing that I can do is clear the attempt. It resets the test questions every time. So we use a test bank. So there will be slightly different questions on every test every time you take it. So it won't be the same one every time, but that's pretty much all we can do. Is just reset it until you get like a good solid attempt. I know that's annoying. I know it's inconvenient to have to keep, setting things up and, blocking out an hour or two to, well, it doesn't take that long, but blocking out a little bit of time, to a not insignificant amount of time to take that test only to have it, not actually work. I know that's annoying. It's annoying for me too, to, not be able to have my kids take tests. That's not ideal for anybody. So my biggest thing for you guys would just be to ask for patience because I'm doing the best I can with it. Greenville Tech is doing the best they can with it, and we're going to get it figured out. We're not going to get to a situation where we're 3 weeks from now and we still have people, feeling like they didn't get a fair chance to take test 2 because it's a really big grade. It's one of the most important ones of the entire semester. If you don't do, as well as you want, it won't break you, but it can definitely bring you up a good bit if you're trying to scale up your grade a little bit. So the number one rule in situations like this is don't freak out. I'm aware of everything that's going on. And we're just going to get through it together. That's all I can say at this point. And that doesn't, if you have an issue with it, please still email me because I do need to get your attempt cleared so you can take it again. We did have a few people take it successfully, so congratulations there, guys. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. I know that it's annoying, but it's just where we're at. So we'll get through it as a team. Okay, so with that, someone, and if you have any individual questions, feel free to email me. Like I said, I'm still kind of catching up on that a little bit, because there have been a lot of them. Okay, so like I said, we're talking about personality. We may not get to this fully. Hold on, I gotta pull the thing back up. I exited out of it. Silly boy. All right, going to assignments. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen for this part, and hopefully you guys won't judge me for the aggressive amount of tabs that I have open, but that's just that's the way I roll. Okay, so where are we here? There we go. All right. So this is not due November 14th, 2021. I'll change that. Because that was what, 4 months ago, 4.5 months ago. So we are individually going to take a Myers-Briggs test, which some of you may have already taken that before. You'll have a leg up on how this goes. We probably won't get fully to personality assessment until next time. That's one of the things that we talked about in the personality chapter. But you can still take the test and you can still kind of brainstorm ideas. If you've read ahead in the book, you can, kind of apply some of the stuff that we'll talk about once we get there. But how this works, I'm sorry, let me get some water. You're going to take the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Assessment, which is the MBTI for short. Okay, so this is technically our second to final assessment. I put this right at the end last time, but I'm going to give you guys a little bit more of a paper specific assignment 5 instead of this. So for this assignment, you will be taking the MBTI and evaluating its strengths and weaknesses based on your experience. To access the test, which is free, use the test provided here. It's a free Myers-Briggs test. It takes like maybe 20 minutes. If you put like a lot of thought into the questions, it'll probably take a little longer, but I don't advise that. It's not like a super strong assessment. So you take the test. It'll be very, like, some questions a lot more general, some are more specific. It'll be like, you're at a party. Do you like, are you the center of attention, or are you just kind of like hanging out in the corner by yourself? That kind of thing. A little more scientific and professional than that, but that is generally the idea. Right. So your answers can be structured in whatever way you want, but they must be a paragraph long. So these, so like 4 paragraphs total. So like probably about a page and a half ish. And this, in total, this assignment should comprise about 400 words, take about a page and a half, just said. So this is your like final writing tune-up before you actually take the test. The next one will be more of a practicing citations, but that's also an important piece of the puzzle. So do try to be thorough. This is probably your best sort of warm up to actually like fleshing out a full paper, which we'll talk about more next time, because the paper is due on the exact same day as the test, as the exam, I should say. So we have another test and then an exam. We're kind of in the sprint to the finish mode because we have a lot of stuff to pack in the next several weeks. Okay, so questions. Answering the following prompts. Number 1, what was your result? So it gives you 4 letters and it'll explain the letters, but then you get to explain the letters. It says, do you agree with the result that you got? Why or why not? And if you've taken the test before, which some of you may have, did you get a similar result? And we'll talk about how personality is something that is relatively stable across your lifespan, but it can change depending on the stage of life that you're in. Something like temperament doesn't change as much, but personality traits actually do, from year to year, even decade to decade. And then 2 and 3 are more like you evaluating the test itself, because pretty much everybody's got to take on how good or how bad the MBTI is. So what about the test that you think was good? Which questions did you like / would you keep? What are the strengths of this particular assessment, for how subjective or objective it is? how open-ended versus closed it is. And we'll talk about that stuff more when we get to like actual like personality assessments. But this is just your opinion, like how in your mind, what were the strengths of these things? Because there's benefits and drawbacks to both. Like giving somebody a more subjective measurement will give you sort of a greater breadth of answers, but it also may not be super pertinent to what you ask. So if you have an objective survey, or if you're trying to get objective answers, that will be a little bit more applicable and probably more accurate. Open-ended and closed, same kind of idea. Number 3, what about the test did you think was less good? So there may be some things along the test, some questions you're like, I don't know about that one. That seems a little too broad. That seems a little too personal. It seems a little too like not relevant to like my personality on a whole. Say which questions were you not a fan of? And then what are the weaknesses of this assessment in your mind? So going back to the the same questions we would ask about the strengths. In this case, we're just evaluating them based on the weaknesses. And what are your conclusions about this personality assessment? So kind of just summarizing all the stuff that you said before. So A, how externally valid is it? Is it reliable? So could you conceivably take it a few days or weeks from now and get the same thing? Why do you think so? And then finally, does it accurately measure what it's trying to measure? So MBTI is trying to measure personality and use a very small set of questions to do that. And does it work? That is the assignment 4. Hopefully it lets you submit it, but that will be due for Sunday. Okay. And on this one, I did not include a sample paper because we're almost to the point where you guys are going to make your own papers. It's time for you to leave the nest, as it were. But we have this. The next assignment after that, like I said, which will only be due for a couple of weeks, is assignment 5, which is just like a works cited, basically practicing doing citations in APA format. And then assignment 6 will be your paper topic and then your paper. So like I said, we have to pack in a test, an exam, a paper, 2 assignments, and a bunch of learning curves into between now and the end of the semester, which is like the beginning of May. And so, woohoo! That's what we have ahead of us. Just take a deep breath because we're moving pretty quickly. All right. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and jump into personality. Hold on, back to the beginning on my board. Personality. There we go. There she is. Okay. So personality. This is chapter 10. All right. So we're starting with a definition. There's a really good crash course video that I can put in. Oh, I mean, it's already in Blackboard, but it's about the Freudians and Rorschach and all of the free association people who are trying to understand personality through that lens, because that's a type of personality assessment that we'll talk about. But today we're mostly going to be talking about Freud. And I feel like when we talk about Freud, I have to give you a disclaimer because I'm going to be saying some words that I would not normally say in a psychology class. And that pretty much all you guys are muted, so I won't be able to hear you giggle, but just prepare yourselves for that. And Freud is really weird. So there's a bunch of stuff in here that you'll be like, what? And that's fine because people for the last 140 years have been like, what? About Freud, because he's kind of bizarre. Okay. I'm starting with a definition of personality. So personality, core set of characteristics that influence the way somebody thinks, acts, and feels. Like I said earlier, they are relatively consistent throughout the lifespan. So we're not talking about character traits. So most of the time when we talk about somebody's personality, we can sort of flavor it with our understanding of how good or bad those personality traits are. And that's not what we're trying to do here. So personality traits are just neutral. They're, have no positive or negative connotations by themselves. We're not talking about character or how these affect other people. It's just things about this person. Okay. Temperament is slightly different. So temperament is more about emotional reaction and just sort of more like affect, more like mood. And that you can see even earlier because it takes a while for personality traits to develop. Like we talked about attitudes in the last chapter. It takes a while for your attitudes to develop. Personality characteristics are a little bit more involved than just your temperament. How grumpy are you? How happy are you? Things like that. And so that temperament remains stable across the lifespan, but can be molded by the environment as well. Not as much as personality. So most of the time, if you're just kind of cheery all the time, that is going to stay the same. But okay, that's just generally. There are exceptions to that. Okay. So this is a chart that lists the main points of all of these personality theories. Recognize some of these terms because they are pretty much just the major psychological theories and frameworks just viewed through a lens of personality, because they pretty much all have a take on how personality develops and how it can or doesn't change over the lifespan. So mostly what we're going to be talking about today is the psychoanalytic personality theory, because that's Freud. So according to Freud, personality develops early in life. We are greatly influenced by unconscious processes, internal conflicts, aggression, and especially sexual urges. We're going to be talking a lot about sex with Freud. And the criticisms, and there are a lot of them, it ignores the importance of current experiences. And so when we're talking about Freud, he was very much of the mind that your past determines a lot about your future, which on the face of it is like, yeah, okay, I'm kind of buying that, but it was like to a genuinely upsetting extent. Overemphasis on the unconscious and the role of sexuality and personality. I'll talk about what the unconscious is here in a minute. Theory based on a biased, non-representative sample. Concepts difficult to operationally define and empirically test. All of that is accurate. So we'll talk about why more in a second. Okay. All right, so when we talk about Freud, we are discussing his broad theory of psychoanalysis, his views regarding personality, as well as the system of psychotherapy and the tools for the exploration of the unconscious. So at the very beginning of the semester, we talked about structuralism, which was kind of them trying to, Titchener et al., trying to work backwards to the structures of the brain through these very open-ended conversations with clients. So Freud was very much in that same vein. Freud is the little lad here on the right. So Freud, if you've got a picture in your head of like what a psychiatrist is, like if you're in your head, it's like somebody reclined on a couch with a person sitting next to them, asking them how they feel, that kind of thing. That's psychoanalysis. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but like that's kind of generally how that works. And it's created a very archetypal, which we'll talk about later, what an archetype is, archetypal understanding of the role of the psychologist / psychiatrist. And a lot of that comes from Freud and his approach to doing therapy with his clients, which was actually quite effective, because at the time, if someone was mentally ill, most of the time what happened was they just sent them to a mental institution, which were unsafe and caused them a lot of harm usually, because they didn't really know what to do with them. They just thought they were irreparably broken and or sort of beyond therapy. So a lot of the clients that Freud got were already mentally ill. So when we talk about his sample that he based a lot of his theories on being non-representative, that's why, because he had a lot of people that were already mentally ill, and that population does not represent the general population. We would understand the general population to largely be neurotypical. But we'll talk about what neurotypicality means more when we get to psychological disorders. But that's why when we say Freud, you can't really draw a bunch of conclusions from Freud's sample. That's why. Okay, so while he presented, so it's controversial and lacking scientific support. A lot of it was based on subjective interviews, which isn't super scientific. And then he presented novel and groundbreaking insights on personality development, but his theory is mostly based on case studies. So using very specific interactions with very specific people to broadly generalize about the nature of mental illness and people's personality development, childhood development, things like that. So why wouldn't you want to do that? So in the last chapter, we talked about Clive Wearing and his very unique and very distinct form of amnesia. So you wouldn't want to make like this grand sweeping overarching theory on memory loss and amnesia from Clive Wearing's case, because not everybody's like Clive Wearing, but that's kind of what Freud did, which is why a lot of people disagree with him so vehemently. Okay, and so we're talking about the topographical model. This is also the words in the middle. We'll talk about that. It's called the structural model. But the iceberg analogy, you can kind of see what they're going for here. That, the part of the iceberg that we see, and you can kind of picture the Titanic over here about to crash into this thing. But the part that we see is not nearly representative of the entire iceberg, because there's a lot more underneath it. So according to Freud, you have these three levels of consciousness. The conscious level is that little tip of the iceberg that peeks out over the top of the water. And so that's everything you're aware of at a given moment. Okay, so your pre-conscious is that level just below that. So mental activities that are outside of your current awareness, but that can be easily brought into awareness. So if you are currently, listening to this lecture and paying incredible levels of attention, which I know you are, that would be your conscious level. So those are the things that you are aware of. Okay, but also there might be like a TV on in the next room. Your dog might be like pawing at you to get their attention. That's pre-conscious. So those are things your brain is processing those other stimuli without actually consciously making you aware of them, because they may not be that high of a priority. So your brain is very good at streamlining which things need to be paid attention to and which don't. Your essential executive, we talked about your working memory a while back in our memory lesson. Your essential executive decides which things you pay attention to, and you may be blocking out some stuff, but that's in your pre-conscious, because that can become conscious very quickly if need be. And then your unconscious. So this is the things that are like buried way down. It's like you're not, it's not in your current awareness. It's probably not going to be in your current awareness anytime soon, because it takes, like it says here, significant effort and or therapy to bring these things up. Okay, so if you are, you think about like a classical association, if you're afraid of, going on roller coasters because like you were at Six Flags one time and you watched somebody get hurt, you may have repressed that memory. You may have, intentionally, push some of those feelings away, and that's affecting you in the present though, because you may be, at Disney World with friends, and they may want you to go ride rock and roller coaster, and you're like, no, thank you. So that is in your unconscious, but it's affecting your conscious level as well. That's what Freud's all about. So he was very much of the mind that unconscious activities affected your conscious activities way more than people realized. And it's at a certain level, it's hard to disagree with him about that, but it's more the extent to which he thought that that was a thing that people take umbrage with. All right, structural model of the mind. You might have heard a couple of these words before, but there are three levels to this. And so you have your id, ego, and your superego. So when I say ego, this is not ego in the sense of like thinking a lot about yourself. Okay, so ego just means self. That's what it means literally. But ego in this case is the referee between these other two, and I will tell you how that works. So id is pretty much just desire. Okay, so it's governed by, you can see here, the pleasure principle. Basically, when you're a baby, And all you can think about is, I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to poop. All of those things are very base desires. These are things that you just need them, and your brain is telling you, I need this. So that's your id. That is your desire is occurring at an unconscious level. You're not actively thinking about these things, but it can still govern your conscious decisions. Now, at a certain level, we'll learn that it's between the ages of 3 and 6, according to Freud, you start to develop guilt, okay? Because you can't always just run around letting your id decide all of your actions for you, because that would just be chaos all the time. So your superego is your conscience. It's the thing that keeps the id in check, guides behavior to follow the rules, because we've talked a lot about norms and how we're supposed to conform to them. Other authority figures, that is your superego is pushing you back towards those. So the majority of the activity at the preconscious and unconscious levels. So again, you're not actively thinking about these things either, but if you have a decision between, and we'll give you an example on the next slide, but something that you want to do versus something that you should do, you have to decide which way to go, and the ego is the thing that decides that. Okay, so your ego manipulates situations, plans for the future, solves problems, makes decisions, because at a certain point you have to make a decision. So if you've ever seen and this always makes me think of The Emperor's New Groove, if you've ever seen this movie before. So there's this character called Kronk. He is the henchman of Yzma, who is this lady that's taken over ruling of this little kingdom. But Kronk, there's several scenes where he has an angel on one of his shoulders and a devil on the other shoulder. So that is basically the id and the superego. So the angel is the superego because it's always trying to keep Kronk going down the path of righteousness, and the id is trying to keep him on the path that rocks. And then Kronk has to decide between them. And so he is the ego in that case. We'll talk about, I think in the Kahoot, which we probably won't get to today, they mentioned the Cat in the Hat, another good example, because the Cat in the Hat is just chaos. He wants everything to be fun and crazy and wacky all the time. So he's id, and then the fish is the superego trying to keep him in check, and the kids have to decide which way to go. So more practical example, you are trying to decide whether you are going to skip class to go see a movie or go to class. So your id is going to be heck yeah, movie sounds awesome, let's go do that. Whereas your superego is going to be no, we should stay in class. Class is important, and that's what we're supposed to do. And then the ego has to choose between those two things. All right. Generally unconscious surfaces to the conscious. Oh, sorry, I just got a notification about running out of time, which, yes, I know. All right, so the id and the superego, you have these conflicts, okay? And your ego has to sort of rationalize that tension between the two. And this is where we get to ego defense mechanisms. Okay, and so your book has a really good chart, which you won't be able to read in this PowerPoint. I don't know why they did this, but it explains all of these. You can see down here a list of them at the bottom. I'll explain a couple of them. I'm probably not going into a ton of detail on them, but this is basically where if there is a conflict between what you want and what you should do, your brain will create this sort of alternate version of things so that you don't have to live in that tension, because we don't like living in tension. Again, you distort perceptions and memories, reducing anxiety caused by the id superego conflict. So they're not always bad. Some are more adaptive than others. So the ones that would be probably worse would be projection. So if you, the example you use in your book is you can see down here at the bottom of this chart, is having a crush on your best friend's boyfriend. I was what? But projection in that case, if you were id would be I like this guy, and the superego is I shouldn't like my best friend's boyfriend because that's just causes a lot of problems. You could project that conflict onto somebody else. So if you saw somebody in your circle of friends that was also in the same position where they liked that a person that somebody else was dating, you'd be like, Sarah sucks. I can't believe that she would like her best friend's boyfriend. Who would do that kind of thing? So you're projecting your own like insecurity about how you feel onto somebody else. You could also repress it, which is basically just saying that's not a thing. Just gonna push that down, ignore that for the time being. You could identify, so you could, this is one of the healthier ones. You could try and figure out, okay, well, I appreciate this thing about my friend, and so I'm going to try and identify using a role model to like model my behavior after somebody else. And there's also like denial. It's like this isn't happening. So similar to repression, but repression doesn't really like make it go away. It just kind of pushes it away from the surface. And denial is like, yeah, this isn't happening. Okay. All right. So we're going to take a break because we got to get into the psychosexual stages after the break, and that's going to take a while. And this is the part where I'm going to start saying some weird words, and we're just going to have to be grown-ups about it. That's just the way it's going to be. Okay. So we're going to come back at 9:23. No, it's a weirdly specific time, but that will be the plan. Okay. Ready, break. See you guys in a minute.